Happy International Women's Day, by the way. So today we are talking about intuition and the truth being inside of you. And I want to talk about this today because intuition is something that is extremely powerful. But when you're dealing with an extremely powerful source, you need to be able to channel and direct that power correctly, or else it can get out of control and cause a lot of damage. So we're going to be looking at the idea that the truth is inside of you, not some external God. And we're going to be looking at how that goes with the idea of intuition and how you can utilize intuition correctly and not let it cause a lot of problems. Because when we get into this, we're going to see that intuition has led to some of the greatest ideas in history, but also it led to the establishment of mainstream religion. So intuition is this really double-edged sword where it's extremely powerful, but we have to be cautious and make sure that we're using it correctly. Because once again, when you're dealing with something so immensely powerful, you have to make sure it's channeled and directed in the right way. So we're going to get into all of this, and intuition, I know, is something we've been talking about a lot lately, but it's an important topic, and particularly today, we're really going to examine the nitty-gritty details, how it links up mathematically, and how, again, as I said, it is this sort of double-edged sword that needs to be used correctly. As you know, as Hyperians, we place logic and reason above all else, but intuition is extremely important, and that's our connection to the source and the frequency domain. And so we're going to look into all that, and as we do, I am going to be reading excerpts from The Holographic Soul by Mike Hockney, which is an excellent book. I will have a link in the description to where you can read it for yourself if you enjoy the work. So let's get started. So here is a great quote by Black Elk. At the center of the universe dwells the Great Spirit, and that center is really everywhere. It lies within each of us. At the center of the universe dwells the mental singularity, and that center really is everywhere. The whole mental universe, the singularity, is holographically contained within every point of space-time. So the source, the singularity, is a dimensionless mathematical point. And it is both, you could say, nowhere and everywhere. It is at the heart of the holos, but it contains but it doesn't have any dimensions. And it's just like a computer code. Because you might be thinking, oh, it's both everywhere and nowhere. Oh, so mystical. What does that mean? But no, it's very rational and very logical. It's non-local. And to understand this, just think about a computer code and a computer game. The computer code is both everywhere and nowhere in the game. If you're in the game, the code is everywhere in that it's non-local and it is the fabric, it is the structure, it is the framework of how the game works. So in that sense, the code is everywhere, but it's also nowhere in that you can't find the code inside the game. You can't literally, take a piece of the game and open it up and ones and zeros will spill out. That's silly, of course not. So you can think of the source, the singularity, as like the code in the game. It's dimensionless, but it gives rise, it makes possible the holos. And what does this have to do with intuition? Well, intuition is our connection to the source. It's our connection to the frequency domain. It's our connection to the code. Just like our senses, well, that's our connection to the holos. That's our connection to the world of space and time. Intuition is our connection to the source, is our connection to non-local information. Our senses are connected to space-time localized information with regard to the Fourier transform. Our senses are associated with the space-time representation, localized information. Whereas our intuition, that is connected to non-local information, the frequency domain, the source, what you might call the code. Senses associated with the game world, the code associated, intuition associated with the code. Given that in a holographic universe, the whole is inside every part, the truth of the whole is inside you. However, it must be understood that the absolute truth is inside you, not your truth. That is, whatever relativistic nonsense you convince yourself is true, sold to you by some self-serving guru. Only mathematics comes guaranteed free of guru bullshit. So, the truth is inside of you. You have access to it. You are an eternal mind, a monad, a system of frequency, a complete consistent set of mathematics. That is what you are. And you, via intuition, have access to the frequency domain. You have access to the all. So you have access to truth. It's not in some external creator God that you have to bow down and worship. It is in you. This is why it says, know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods. Because you are the universe and you are the gods. In the Gospel of Thomas, which is a Gnostic gospel, by the way, some people debate whether it's a Gnostic gospel or not a Gnostic gospel, but regardless, it's a book banned from the Bible. In that banned from the Bible book, it talks about how you can access truth and salvation by looking within and knowing what you are. So, these are, of course, metaphorical ways of understanding it. But, mathematically speaking, in a holographic universe, the whole is in every part. You are an eternal monadic mind, and you have access to the code, the truth of existence. Now, it's important to understand here, all right? This means that the absolute truth is inside you, not your truth. So remember, it's really important to understand that we are not New Agers. Neither are we mystics. That is a very dangerous thing to have. And one of the dangerous concepts going around is like, oh, everyone has their own truth. That's your truth. Tell me your truth. This is a very dangerous idea to have. You don't want to conflate truth with relativism. Everyone has their own perspective. Truth is absolute. Someone can have a perspective, but guess what? That perspective can be wrong. There's a lot of hateful people that have hateful perspectives. Is that their truth? No, it's their perspective, which is shit and wrong. Racist, homophobic, misogynistic, sexist, violent people, discriminatory people, do they have their own truth? No, they have a perspective that is wrong and terrible. So this whole idea of, everyone has their own truth is dangerous. You don't want to conflate truth with relativism. So yes, you have truth inside you. But this doesn't mean that whatever you convince yourself to be true is true. No, that doesn't mean that. And it doesn't mean that whatever you believe by, some guru is true. No, that means that you have truth inside you, but it's up to you to dive into the deep waters and find that pearl of absolute truth. And that takes a lot of work. It's not just like, I got this intuition and you know what? This is true now and I'm going to believe it, because a lot of people get a lot of different intuitions. And this is where it gets very important to remember that intuition plugs us into the source. But reason and logic must be placed above all to filter, sort, and order that information to make sure that it is, in fact, consistent with reality. because you're getting a lot of non-local information. And you need reason to make sure that information is in fact true. And as we keep going here, we're going to see how important that is. Because if you're just plugged into intuition and have no sense of reason to guide it, you will go insane. And I mean that literally. You know, look at people who have intuitions about all these crazy ideas about, you know, lizard people and hollow moon bases and ascending to the 45th dimension and all these ideas that they just take to be true because they aren't rationally and critically analyzing their intuitions. This is kind of like when you, let's say, are partaking of a psychedelic substance. Remember, don't do anything dangerous or illegal, disclaimer. But if you happen to be partaking in a psychedelic substance, that plugs you in, that makes you puts you in a very intuitive state and plugs you into the frequency domain. But guess what? That information it comes in very symbolically, very jumbled, very, very dreamlike. So you might have some amazing intuitions, such as we are all one, we're all united, you know, subject and object merge at a certain point. But guess what? You also hear about people talking about really crazy ideas when they're on psychedelics too. Like, oh man, maybe we're all just fleas on the back of a cosmic dog or something. Right? So when you are done having that intuitive experience, what you need to do is examine it with reason and logic and go, oh, okay, I've had all these intuitions. I have all this content. Now let's sift through it, kind of like panning for gold or sifting through dirt to find the gold. All right, these ideas are not compatible with logic and reason. We can move that inside. These, however, are. They warrant further explanation. They won't warrant further investigating. Let's use our logic and reason to investigate them further. So do you see the difference between just blindly taking in everything your intuition, you know, whatever comes in, and then the difference between examining it then with logic and reason? Huge difference. Huge difference. Because you're going to have people with conflicting intuitions. Some people might have the idea that reality is one and only one. Someone else might have the idea that reality is many. Guess what? In logic and reason, you know, we know that reality is both one and many at the same time. And you could potentially have two peoples go to war with each other over these ideas that are seemingly contradictory. Well, guess what? If you use logic and reason, you'd be able to knit them together and see how it all works out. So we're going to keep going, but I want you to keep that in mind, that preliminary idea. The intuition is what plugs you into the frequency domain, but logic and reason is necessary for examining it and being able to filter it and order it and structure it correctly. We've been talking about this a lot lately because it's such an important concept, and I really want people to understand this because I talk about this a lot, and then I'll get a comment from someone on the video that goes, oh yes, so I'll just trust my intuition and everything I'll just go with whatever my intuition says. And I'm just like, no, did you even watch the video? I just said the entire video is literally about how you must order it according to logic and reason. Intuition is unmediated. Intuition is just here it comes. You have to use your logic and reason to then order it and structure it. You know, it's kind of like watching TV. If you're watching TV, you have to have the TV tune into a particular channel. Not just have all the channels coming at once. Because guess what? If you have all the channels coming at once, you're not going to be able to make sense of any of it. You might have a romantic comedy playing with a documentary playing with sci-fi. And if you have a romantic comedy playing with sci-fi and playing with a documentary, well, you're going to believe that aliens want to come visit the planet to take you out on a coffee date or something. I know this is silly, but this is very analogous to how when you're having frequency information come in, it's non-local information. It's coming in all at once, and you can come up with some very crazy ideas like, you know, lizard people living in the hollow moon to take over the earth. And this is why you need reason and logic to filter it, order it, and structure it. Just like that TV channel, you'll be able to tune to particular channels and order it and structure it and see that, oh, there are different channels that mean different things for different times, for different purposes, right? And when you're plugged into your the frequency domain, which is also the domain of the unconscious, you're going to have, stuff from the collective unconscious come in, stuff from your shadow self come in, stuff from your mirror self come in, stuff from, just the structure of reality. You're going to have all that stuff coming in. And just like all the TV channels at once, you better be able to filter it, organize it, and structure it, or you're going to go crazy and start believing in hollow moon bases. This is, like a perfect example of this is David Icke. David Icke is a person who says some interesting things about reality, such as that reality is frequency. But my God, he goes off the deep end with hollow moon bases and aliens, reptiles, and this is an example of someone who is not using logic and reason to parse the data that's coming in. It's like having all the TV channels on at once. So, let's talk a little bit about math and intuition, since Hyperianism is based on ontological mathematics. So, Wittgenstein said there was no such thing as mathematical intuition, since mathematics was, in his opinion, all about robotic rule following. This is important to understand, that this is the complete wrong interpretation of mathematics to have. And this is why mathematics is so boring as it's taught to you in school. Because as it's taught to you in school, it's taught as robotic rule following. And devoid and lacking of life, lacking of intuition, lacking in any of these sorts of things. And this is acutely lacking in insight. Mathematical intuition is in fact about seeing new, unexpected mathematical connections, such as that underlie all great advances in mathematics. Mathematics is a kind of enormous, protean, infinite dimensional holographic labyrinth. There are endless ways of finding your way through it, connecting different parts of it, seeing it from different perspectives, associating elements that seem to have no possible links. Math is actually the most intuitive subject of all. Moreover, your intuitions can be proved absolutely correctly. Absolutely correct, unlike mystical woo-woo, religious and spiritual intuitions. So, and that's a really important thing to understand. When we start understanding reality via ontological mathematics, this is what allows us to prove or disprove certain things. Even human language doesn't allow us to do this, because human language is a conceptual derivative of mathematics. The true language of existence is mathematics. So, and this is the power of understanding ontological mathematics, such that if you have, if person A has an intuition about reality and person B has an intuition about reality, when you use ontological mathematics, you can prove who is right and who isn't. It was Leibniz who wanted to say, if two people are having an argument, all you would have to do is say, let us calculate to figure out who is correct and who isn't. Now, let me be very clear and say this applies to the formal structure of reality. There are some elements of reality that are subjective regarding how you experience reality. And this is where you have subjective ways of being and experiencing. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the formal structure of reality, such as, is reality material or is reality mental? Is there a creator God or is there not a creator God? Is there reincarnation or is there not reincarnation? Do you see how this has to do with the structure and fabric and mechanism of existence? These can be shown via ontological mathematics, whether they are true or not. Now, something that is a purely subjective idea, like, I think this piece of painting is appealing. This piece of art is appealing. That's a subjective preference. And that's not something that can be proven true or not. It doesn't have objective validity. I might like this painting. You might hate this painting. That's something that is a subjective experience. And whether one likes or dislikes something is not the same as an objective claim about the nature of reality. So objective claims about the nature of reality we can use ontological mathematics to show whether it's true or not. So this is what's really important. And this is why this is the big important thing about Hyperianism, is that we're not some New Age mystical we're completely and totally against New Age. We are against New Age. Okay, let me be very clear about that. We are not a New Age system, and we do not promote New Ageism in any shape, way, or form. It is contradictory to us. So we aren't based on New Age mystical nonsense. What we base our ideas on is ontological mathematics. So you can have an idea and an intuition about existence and reality, and you of course want to see if it is compatible mathematically. If it's compatible with mathematics, you know that's an area worth investigating. If it's incompatible, if you have some intuition that translates to 2 + 2 = 64, you know that that's ridiculous and not true, and that you're getting, frequency channels crossed, to put it simply. You're not getting an accurate, so something has gone wrong somewhere. But if it does jive, if it is compatible, then you know it's worth investigating. So what are meaningful intuitions if they are not connected to rules and reality? Intuition isn't about fantasy and irrationality. Intuition is about linking directly to the most fundamental level of existence, about escaping from the phenomenon. And so your intuition links you to the frequency domain. It links you to the source. If we are thinking about in terms of music, think about a piano and the song. There are two things here. We have the piano and the song. The song is dependent on the piano, but the piano is not dependent on the song. You can have the piano and no song, but you can't have a song and no piano. The song is like the physical universe, the holos. The piano is like the source. You can have the holos without the source, you can have the source without the holos, but you can't have the holos without the source. So our intuition links us to the piano, the essence, the fundamental foundation of existence. Intuition is one of the most mysterious phenomena of all. How can someone take possession of ideas seemingly out of thin air? To understand intuition, it's first necessary to explain the senses with which intuition is typically contrasted, as in Jung's personality types. The senses use inverse Fourier transform mathematics, and their task is to provide representations in the space-time domain of functions from the frequency domain outside space-time. So you have the frequency domain, which is non-local information. Fourier mathematics knows that we can represent information in two different ways. There's the frequency representation, and then there's the space-time representation. So we have frequency functions. And those frequency functions, what our senses do is tune in to the space-time representation of frequency functions. And this gives us access to local information. So the frequency domain is non-local, and the space-time holos is local. And understanding the difference between localized information and non-local information is important. And here's an easy way to understand it. Local information is dependent on, you can think of it this way. I'm going to, this is in a nutshell. Localized information depends on location. Localized location, all right? Non-local information doesn't depend on location. It's everywhere at once. Once again, if that seems tricky to grasp, think about a computer game and computer code. The computer game, the game world, that's localized information in our analogy, okay? In that, in the game world, there is a game cup. This game cup is a certain distance from me. This is localized information. The code is non-local information in that it's everywhere. It's not location dependent. The code for this cup is not literally in the, you can't break open the cup and find the cup code in there. The code for the cup is within the rest of the code of the game, and there's no location of that code. That code is not dependent on the localized game information. So likewise, in the holos, the domain of spacetime, the so-called physical world, it's a local domain. It depends on location. I am here in Los Angeles right now, and you are in Canada. Rowan is in Canada. Hello, Rowan. And so is Susan and Megan. You're all in Canada. Hi. We have other people in Europe. Other people in Texas. Raph is in Texas. Hi, Raph. You're not probably watching right now, but hi anyway. So this is all localized. Frequency, however, the frequency domain is non-local information. So your senses are associated with the space-time representation of frequency functions. Your senses are tuned into local information. Well, why? Because your senses were developed as an evolutionary survival mechanism. And you want to know that, oh, there is a bear 20 meters from me. I need to run in this direction to avoid being consumed by said bear. You see how local information is very important. Space, your senses are tuned into the space-time local representation of frequency functions. Now, your intuition is tuned into the non-local frequency function itself. And hopefully, that gives you a good intuition of the difference between local information and non-local information. So the senses are all about localism, being aware of our immediate environment. They're vital to our survival and to our existence as individuals inhabiting our own space in our own time. This is also what gives us, particularity and individuality. In the frequency domain, everything is, the space-time holos domain is the domain of separateness and mininess. And the frequency domain is the domain of unity. So this domain is also what carves out our independent existence, our individuality. Because as monads, we all exist in the same, I want to say location, but it's not really, it's location zero. It's the origin. It's location zero. And all of us exist there in a single mathematical point together. Even though we might be in Los Angeles, Canada, and Texas, locally, in space-time avatars, Non-locally, we're all in the singularity. Just like if we all had VR headsets strapped to us, even if we were all standing right next to each other in the same room, in the VR world, we could be on different sides of the VR reality. But if we were to take off the VR headsets, we'd see, oh, hey, you're right next to me. It's a bit like that, but even more so, because there is no next to. It's just all in the same zeroth dimension, the source, the singularity, the frequency domain. So, if nature has local features, the possibility immediately arises that it also has non-local features. To deny this, a skeptic would have to present a sufficient reason why non-local features are impossible, in contrast with local features. So in other words, this cup has non-local features, has local features, right? This cup has local features, which is which I am tuning into with my senses. It is a certain distance away from me, it is a certain height, etc. But there's also a frequency function associated. Just like in a video game, you have the visual representation of the cup, but there's also a code associated with that cup as well. So if nature has non-local features, the possibility immediately arises that it also has non-local features. Typically, scientists dismiss all non-local phenomena. Now, why do they do this? Because scientists are an empirical ideology. And empiricism says that knowledge is gained through the senses. You cannot see through your senses the non-local frequency domain, because that's by definition not what the senses are tuned to. The senses are tuned to space-time localized information. And this is why scientism is a failed paradigm that has already reached its limit and will collapse and be replaced by ontological mathematics. Hyperianism and ontological mathematics will replace scientific materialism and empiricism, because scientific empiricism says that knowledge is gained through the senses. But again, that's like a video game character saying that the game world exists but that denies the code exists because they cannot see the code within the game. Well, that's ridiculous. Reason allows us to know that the code exists. So scientific empiricism is completely failed precisely because it says that knowledge is only gained through the senses. So scientists dismiss all non-local phenomena, yet non-localism is built into science's greatest triumph, quantum mechanics. To this day, over a century after its discovery, quantum mechanics remains unfathomable to the scientific mind, which is based on the senses and localism. So, in quantum mechanics, look this up. Just do a Google search if you don't believe me, but scientists are baffled by quantum mechanics. They cannot explain it. They have no idea how it can possibly work. Who was it? Who was it that said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics, or something like this? I'm paraphrasing. I believe it was Richard Feynman who said this. I could be wrong, but I believe it was Richard Feynman. And the reason why that scientists cannot understand quantum mechanics, they can't understand wave-particle duality, they can't understand quantum entanglement, etc., is because they deny the mental aspect of existence, which is non-local. And as soon as you understand that this is a mental mathematical existence, quantum mechanics is no longer this huge mystery. It's actually obvious. So, given the existence of non-local features, there must be an aspect of the mind that has evolved to give us access to this domain, since otherwise we would be wasting a supremely valuable resource. Evolution would not be so blind. It always finds a way to make use of everything, especially where any competitive advantage is conferred. Intuition is the mental attribute that has evolved to give us access to the interconnected domain of non-localism that exists outside space and time. Intuition deals with frequency wave functions themselves, functions in the frequency domain, and forward Fourier transforms, space-time functions converted into frequency functions, while the senses deal with inverse Fourier transforms, representations of frequency functions in the space and time domain. Intuition and the senses are a natural complementary pair, yet they are inversely related. The more sensory you are, the less intuitive you are, and vice versa. That's why Jung had them as an opposing pair. One is the shadow of the other. Physics is all about the local environment, the one we detect with our senses. Metaphysics, on the other hand, is all about the non-local environment, invisible to the senses but visible to reason and intuition. Thinking lies between the senses and intuition and can ally itself with one or the other. The same is true of feelings. When thinking is tied to the senses, it produces scientists. It also produces most mathematicians and all empiricists, materialists, and pragmatist philosophers. When thinking is tied to intuition, it produces metaphysicians, rationalists, idealists, Platonists, and ontological mathematicians, and Hyperians. We tie reason and intuition together. Reason and intuition go together, and this is where Hyperians pair these together. So both reason and intuition give us access to the non-local domain, just in different ways. Intuition is sort of this unconscious, direct downloading of data. Reason is this more discursive, analytic, sequential, conscious exploration. And we want reason and intuition to work together. As I have said before, intuition is just when intuition gives you these, what you might call downloads. I don't like using that term because it's a very new agey sort of term. But I mean, it works sort of well. It is sort of this just incoming of information. Reason is what allows one to order it, filter it, sift it, and connect it. Again, it's like the television just getting all the different frequencies at once. You have to see, order it, dissect it, and see the different channels. So, just to emphasize again, Hyperians are the ones who pair reason and intuition together. We just want to make sure that reason, we don't want to place intuition above reason. Because remember, intuition is what will allow us to order it and filter it and connect and knit it together. The history of intellectualism has been the struggle between those thinkers ruled by their senses and those by their intuition. The empiricists, materialists, and scientists are the senses, sensory proponents inclined to atheism. The rationalists, idealists, and metaphysicians are those on the side of intuition and are inclined to philosophy, religion, and spirituality. The sensing types gained an enormous advantage by invoking mathematics to measure the observable world and predict various physical phenomena. Through science, the world has been transformed, and this success has been used to vindicate the empiricist materialist paradigm. What metaphysicians has to do is embrace mathematics too, much more comprehensively. Then that's precisely what Illuminism does. Illuminism is ontological mathematics defined by rational unobservables available to reason and intuition, but not the senses. So just to emphasize here, to remember the word metaphysics, today, when people say metaphysics colloquially, they think of things like, like crystals and astrology and sage and rituals. That's not what metaphysics means. Metaphysics just means what comes prior to physics, what physics relies on. So philosophically, what is metaphysics philosophically? It's just the fundamental foundational structure of reality that physics depends on. So in terms of Hyperianism, mathematics is metaphysics. So just so you know, when you hear metaphysics, it doesn't mean any sort of new age woo or mystical nonsense or anything like that. It's just literally the most foundational structure of existence in Hyperianism, that is mathematics. Intuition will be vindicated as soon as an experiment is performed that's incontestably incompatible with materialism. In fact, the experiments used to prove Bell's inequality theorem are already formally incompatible with the scientific bedrock of localism. But something much more spectacular is required, something that leaves no wiggle room for materialists. Many scientists accept non-localism in an abstract sense, but argue that it can't be used for signaling, hence does not refute Einstein's special theory of relativity in any practical sense. In other words, they now rely on pragmatism rather than facts and principles to defend Einstein, and don't seem remotely concerned by this. Hallucinogenic drugs, psychedelics, enormously disturb normal sensory operations and offer a glimpse of the dreamy, trippy, non-local frequency domain. This is what I was talking about earlier, how psychedelics give one access, put one in a very intuitive state. People talk about a sixth sense, extrasensory perception, the third eye, the inner eye, and so on. In fact, these have nothing to do with the senses. The senses are all about localism and consciousness. Intuition is all about non-localism and the unconscious. So when people refer to ideas coming to them out of nothing, what they mean is that their unconscious mind has detected something meaningful and managed to smuggle it in through to consciousness. So that's what's happening here. It's not a god communicating with you. It's not, the ascended masters or your angel guides or something. It's that something in your unconscious has managed to make its way into consciousness. Your unconscious detected something meaningful and has managed to get its way into your consciousness. Intuition is inherently much less predictable than sensory perception and can't be made to perform to order. This is why intuition is regarded by materialists as woo-woo and mumbo-jumbo. Above all, the scientific method can't be applied to it. To accept the existence of intuition is to accept non-local effects, not spooky action at a distance, as Einstein put it. It automatically implies a domain of mind independent of matter. Now, human beings were once enormously more intuitive than they are now. When humans had bicameral minds, they were dominated by the right hemisphere, the hemisphere that specializes in intuition. They were essentially attuned to non-local effects, and they underwent remote control by voices in their heads, which were interpreted as the voices of the gods. Indeed, that's exactly what they were. Gods, or higher beings, once directed humanity as depicted in Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. This is discussed by Julian Jaynes, the forgotten genius who first proposed the bicameral hypothesis, though he himself thought the voices were invented by the mind itself. The rise of the left hemisphere consciousness and increasing sensory capability sabotaged human intuition. We became local, sensory, conscious beings rather than intuitive bicameral beings attuned to non-local effects and in touch with divine voices. Sensing types now outnumber intuitives by 3-1. The question of where humanity's religious inclinations come from is one of the most important and fascinating of all. If we accept the scientific materialism doctrine of dead, mindless atoms miraculously coming together to create life and mind, which are formerly meaningless and purposeless, the idea that these collections of dead, lifeless atoms should create a fantasy whereby they long for immortality seems bizarre and improbable in the extreme. In fact, given that science denies that human beings have free will, consciousness itself is inexplicable in materialist terms. It's wholly superfluous and can't alter any of the scientific causality nets in which we are allegedly trapped. In fact, humans are religious because they experience religion directly. Religion arose from three primary reasons. People saw another world in their dreams where the dead were still alive. 2, they directly heard the voices of the gods in their own heads via bicameralism. And 3, they were much more intuitive than they are now and experienced reality in a radically different way from most humans today. Why is religion now dying? Because we no longer have the hyper-realistic dreams we once had. The voices of the gods are silent, and intuition in the vast majority of people is a shadow of its former self. Once dominant, it's now secondary. Those who are highly intuitive, on par with the oracles of Delphi, who flourished for many hundreds of years, are now regarded as insane. They're locked up, as all the original oracles and prophets would be if they reappeared now. Modern people, especially scientists, struggle with non-localism and intuition and keep slipping back into materialist, empiricist, localist thinking. Many people clearly have a horrendous struggle grasping that at this very moment, every mind in the universe is connected to theirs, and theirs to every other mind in the universe. Left hemisphere people, thinking sensing types, that is scientists, are almost wholly devoid of religious sensibilities, which is of course why most are atheists. They literally cannot conceive of a religious, spiritual, metaphysical, or ontological mathematical aspect of existence. Religion is a right hemisphere phenomenon. The most religious people are feeling intuitives. The next most religious are thinking intuitives. Next comes the feeling sensing types. The thinking types are not religious at all. They're locked into the empiricist materialist paradigm, which has no place for gods, souls, the afterlife, or any non-local effects. Intellectually, our world has fallen under the spell of the atheist scientists. Religiously, the feeling sensing types, the Abrahamists, are in charge, and they are wholly irrational. Thus, the enlightened, rational intuitives are engaged in a war on two fronts against the atheistic scientists and the irrational Abrahamic religious mindset. We need the feeling, thinking, and intuitives to be in charge of the world, delivering a paradise of rational religion and spirituality and escaping from the curse of materialism, consumerism, and irrational faith. All major figures of all major figures of the world's religious history were bicameral feeling intuitives. All of them were highly susceptible to voices. Tragically, all of the Abrahamic prophets were susceptible to the devil's voice. Now, what I want to talk about here is a little bit, because what we're talking about here is intuition. And let me talk a little bit about, I don't want to get too involved in this because I think we can do a whole video about this very important topic, but a little bit about Julian Jaynes's theory of the bicameral mind. So, basically, the theory of Julian Jaynes is that before humanity was self-aware, they existed in a bicameral state. And this bicameral state meant that the right brain, unconscious, was in charge rather than the left brain, unconscious. And so what Julian Jaynes posits is that humanity was, in a sense, completely controlled by auditory hallucinations, in that they were hearing the voices of the gods, which was the voices of the unconscious, directing and controlling them and telling them what to do and guiding them. And that this is how religion arose. Eventually, the left hemisphere ego consciousness evolved and dominated and became the controlling factor, and those voices became less and less. So, but the main issue here, I don't want to talk too much about Julian Jaynes' theory of the bicameral brain, because I want to do a whole video on that at some point. But at least with regard to intuition, what I want to get across is that in the past, humanity was less rational, but much more intuitive. Meaning it was less left brain and more right brain. And so in the past, we had a greater connection to intuition, but we're less rational. So this, it's a good thing to be connected to intuition. But guess what? This developed into all the different mainstream religions that we have today. Because you had all this intuitive data coming in, and the people who received this data constructed religions based on this intuition, and it was not structured by logic and reason. Later on, we'll see those who did begin to structure it via logic and reason. But this is sort of the origin of religion. Now, the problem today is that as we developed self-awareness, and as the left brain consciousness began to dominate the right brain unconscious, we became less connected intuitively. And so what we want to do today is we do not want to revert to the consciousness of millennia ago. But what we want to do is we want to retain our self-awareness, retain our rationality, while being plugged in to the source, the frequency domain, the unconscious. So in essence, we want to recover that connection to the source while retaining our self-awareness and rationality. So this is the important thing to understand, is that when intuition is unrestrained, unfettered, and not guided, you are going to have, this is how dangerous mainstream religions began. This is how people will begin to lose their mind, where they start believing crazy theories, like, lizard people living in the hollow moon. And this is where the birth of new dangerous mainstream religions will begin, like New Ageism. New Ageism is a religion. I know people say, oh, it's spirituality, it's not a religion. Whatever you want to call it, I don't care. It's a way of thinking that is dangerous and is just old mainstream religion in a different guise, a different form. Instead of God will take care of me and answer my prayers, it becomes, oh, the universe is looking out for me, and so I'm sending positive frequencies. It's same ideas, just rehashed in different trappings. So intuition is extremely powerful, but we want to have it guided by logic and reason so that we can construct a way of understanding reality that matches how reality actually is and truly is in itself, without, taking a one-way trip to crazy town, which most of these new age and mystical thinkings will have you arrive at that destination. So it's important to understand that Hyperianism pairs reason and intuition together. They are not enemies. They are complementary functions that must work together, and this is where we talk about the mirror self. Remember the mirror self. And synchronizing the left and right hemispheric functions of the brain to work in a complementary fashion. We, through the power of intuition and reason, will construct a new humanity and a new earth. So I can't stress enough, intuition is incredibly powerful, and we must have that connection to the source, but we also must order it and place logic and reason above all else as the ordering, functioning, guiding, and filtering function. And so we can understand, how does intuition work? Intuition is simply a right hemispheric function which allows us and gives us access to the frequency domain, whereas the senses is what allows us to tune into the space-time domain. Remember, everything again is related by the Fourier transform. Frequency information and space-time information, and going back and forth from one to the other. So, this is how you can understand the mathematical side of intuition versus the senses. Senses is all about localized information, and intuition is all about non-local information. It's like the code versus the video game world. So I hope that this has given you an understanding of the difference between intuition and the senses, and local information and non-local information, and space-time representations and frequency information, and how they all relate together, and how we need them to be working and coordinating and working in a complementary way, rather than having them disjointed or enemies. We must use and harness the great power of intuition and order it through logic and reason. So, we are going to be continuing exploring this. Like I said, Julian Jaynes' theory of bicameralism is extremely interesting, but I want to do a whole video just based on that, because it's a very complex topic, and it has to do with the birth of religion, and how humanity used to be connected in such a way where they were having auditory hallucinations. It's the stage that Julian Jaynes posits that came before self-awareness. So we're going to do a video on that. Right now, I'm going to jump into the comments. We're going to answer some questions. And someone ordered me like 3 burgers. So we're going to see how we're going to do that. I'm going to eat live with you guys. And by the way, if you're watching the replay of this video, guess what? You miss out on a lot of stuff, like the questions and answers and just all the weird things that happens as well. So this is why you need to show up when I'm actually live. So make sure that you're subscribed, and make sure you have hit the bell to turn on all notifications when that does happen, because even if you are watching the replays, you're missing a lot. A lot happens, a lot of important information, and a lot of fun stuff too. So hit the thing.